Welcome to the Stories That Shape Us podcast with Joanna Daniel. This is the first time I am doing the podcast live on video so that we can stream also over YouTube. Welcome. Today is day 140 of the podcast. We started on the 13th of August. And if you want to catch up with the series of Stories That Shape Us with Joanna Daniel, you can find it on Spotify and Apple Podcast. We've been having a really good time. We've dealt with really different subjects. We started the Boundaries series last week, and I thought I was going to end last week, Friday, with the Boundaries series, but because of comments and feedback, and I know people want to hear more about the boundaries, especially boundaries in Christian women, and how we can manage difficult conversation when we struggle to set boundaries. And so this week I'm doing boundaries with parents. So last week I did boundaries with Christian women, different aspect of boundaries. And today we're doing boundaries with parents, especially when boundaries and attachment. This week rather is boundaries and attachment. And I'm looking today at specifically at boundaries with parents when there is insecure attachment. So how do we set boundaries with our parents when there's insecure attachment? Now, boundaries are every healthy relationship have boundaries. And you might hear me say this all the time when I'm doing series around boundaries. And a couple of days ago, I talked about sometimes the difficulty in setting boundaries when culture is an issue. Depending on the culture that you're from, sometimes boundaries might be seen as disrespect. I want you to know that boundaries is not disrespect. Boundaries are healthy. Relationships that are healthy have them. And if you want to have healthy relationships with your parents, regardless of culture, then you will need boundaries. If you go back to yesterday's podcast and listen to boundaries with parents, there's some things that I gave that will show that when there's some principles, there's some common principles that you can use to set boundaries with your parents. This irregardless of culture, that is not disrespect. Okay. So there's some things that you can do because everything have principles and it applies across culture. And regardless of the culture, the religion that you're in, we need good boundaries to have healthy relationships. So today I'm going to talk about one of the things that impacts our ability to set boundaries. And I'm going to share why this impacts our ability to set boundaries. So today's title is Boundaries and Attachment. Boundaries and Attachment. And I especially want to talk about insecure attachment. Because when we have secure attachment, then boundaries is not an issue because our parents taught us to do boundaries in those foundational years. We learned self-respect, we learned self-value, we had good self-esteem. All of that was nurtured. And so we knew how to set boundaries. It was normal and natural for us. They respect our boundaries from really early in life. And so we learned to respect ourselves, our own boundaries, our own value, and other people. We could communicate that with other people. I also dealt with that in the episode on boundary, how to be a boundary. But when there's attachment, so attachment is a word given by care. That attachment is a word that is used by psychologists to describe the relationship between children and their primary caregivers, right? And we have different types of attachment pattern. When we have secure attachment, our relationships flow easier. There's an easy flow between togetherness and aloneness. The relationship has healthy communication and a healthy relational dynamic. But when there's insecure attachment, whether we're talking avoidant or disorganized or anxious attachment patterns, one, we go inward, which is avoidant. Insecure is we are more focused on other people in meeting our needs. And of disorganized, which is we call fearful avoidant, is this place between both worlds. So the caregiver is also the scary place. So home that should be your safe place is also the place that you're afraid. Home was not safe for you in any way at all, but it should be. So it's really confusing. It's really confusing for us when we're young, when home was not safe, because the place that should be safe isn't safe. And we see that a lot in teens, and they play it out in different ways, where sometimes the antisocial behaviors and some of the problems that we have in school with children can stem back to home not being a safe place. And so some of the ways that we can fix that is how to make home a safe place. How do we teach people to make home a safe place? But that's for another podcast. Now I'm talking about how you can set boundaries with your parents when attachment is insecure. Because though attachment is insecure doesn't mean that you necessarily don't have connection. And when I say connection, it doesn't have to be secure, safe connection. It just can't just be connection. Because sometimes there is loyalty, there is a sense of not necessarily belonging, but we want belonging. And because we want belonging, then we stay in a system, even if it's harmful, because we don't know yet how to be on our own, how to love ourselves just as we are, how to know that there are people in the world who will connect with us and who will love us and who will be safe and loving and honoring and respectful to us. We don't know that yet, because we're still stuck in trying to get the people in our families to love us, to care about us. And I just want to say that if they don't love and care about you, it's not your fault. It's not your fault. I really want you to hear that. It is not your fault. If home was not a safe place and you've lived your life being a people pleaser, trying to bend yourself in all kinds of shapes to please them and to get a different response for them, it's not your fault that you didn't get the response. Okay. So how do we do the boundaries when we're trying to do that? Now, one of the first things to do to set boundaries when there's insecure attachment is to try to stop the people pleasing. And I say try because I know it's not so easy to do, because you may have spent your whole life doing it because you felt that was going to be the way to get approval, to get love, to get respect, to feel like you have a sense of belonging and to feel loved. That's not going to do it. People pleasing. So you might people please in different way. Also, it might have saved you from some punitive punishment. It might save you from being the black sheep in the family. It might save you from the harm that you see other people experience. It might save you from a lot of things. And it was a way to cope because you just kind of gave in because that was your survival response. Now, as you're an adult and you're listening to this podcast, so that means you're seeking out ways to heal. As you're an adult, you can heal the wounds, the core wound of abandonment, that experience. You can heal those attachment injuries through help and therapy, and you can learn how to come home to yourself and understand who you are, reframe, redefine your identity outside of that system that was harmful to you, so that you can know who you are to begin to set boundaries. Because boundaries are value driven, our boundaries. We need to know who we are. We need to understand the things that are important to us. We need to know, own, and accept our needs. So that's knowing, owning, and accepting our needs in order for us to adequately set boundaries. Because when we don't know who we are, we won't know what our values are. We won't know what's important to us. So when you are in the mode of people pleasing, when you are doing things to please others and to get a response, then that is the tension that exists there won't enable you to set boundaries. If you're still trying to gratify your mom, or you're still trying to please your dad, or you're still trying to get along with your siblings despite them being harmful, it won't help to set boundaries. You won't be able to release and to let go enough to set boundaries. So the first thing to do, there are many things that we can do to set boundaries. If you there's a link that's going to be in the show notes of this episode around boundary setting. It's boundaries and the Bible. So boundaries and some of the limits that you can set, and just some of the ways to set healthy boundaries that I discussed in that 3-part audio series that will help you understand some more around what boundaries are. But one of the important things to do is what is the coping mechanism that you're using? If you identify with not having secure attachment with your caregivers, what is the coping strategy that you use? Because sometimes the coping strategy rather that you use prevents you from being able to understand who you are, know what your values are, know what your needs are, know what the things are that is important to you to begin to set boundaries. We can't do it without knowing. It's kind of like boundary in your home. You wouldn't, if you didn't have a home, you can't you don't have a door to close. Your door of the home is your boundary. When people come, they knock the door, they ring the doorbell. But if there was no door on, if you were still deciding whether or not you want a door or what kind, people could just come and go freely as they please. But you have a door on your house, right? So the boundaries are an invisible line that protects you from harm, right? And help your relationships be safe, help you be able to interact safely with others and others interact safely with you. Your door is the things that you're going to think about, like, how do I want to use my time, my resources, my intellect, my energy? What are those things that are important to me that I feel needs protecting? And without knowing that, so that's going to go to the core of who you are. What are those things that are important to me that needs protecting? So it's an acknowledgement that the relationship is insecure. There's no security in the connection. And there's two, acknowledging that you've developed strategies and ways of coping that compromised your values, your attitudes, your needs, and your wants. You may not have known them, but now you're going to get to learn to know them. And three, learn how to communicate. Not three. Three is be comfortable with your needs, and four, being able to communicate now as you discover your needs and your values and the things that are important to you. Your boundaries are going to come out of that, and as you become comfortable with them for yourself, you'll be able to comfortably express them to others and to be a boundary, so people will see that, respect that. Okay, thank you for joining me in this episode of Stories That Shape Us. I hope you'll join me on the next story.